Yeah, and
Okay.
you usually, I mean, in some of your talks, even your writing, you talk about withholding intimacy and sexless marriage epidemic. Is kunyaza related to this, or is this a different thing on its own, and like how to deal with it?
But that's actually different. That's
Okay,
more from Islamic perspective,
got it.
and it's something that I know in this climate it's quite difficult to kind of mention these hadith because people be triggered and things like that. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam he said it for a reason a number of times, and scholars they spoke about it in terms of again I'm not going to get into the whole like angels cursing women and things like that, but in terms of informing women. And even one particular hadith that when a woman asked before she got married, she said, "What is the right of the husband over the wife?" And the Prophet ﷺ informed her that if he calls you to the bedroom, you shouldn't withhold, meaning you shouldn't weaponize sex. You shouldn't use sex as a tool to kind of abuse your husband. And this does happen a lot.
Hmm.
And one of the things that's quite difficult to kind of even have this conversation in public is because you wouldn't know if a woman is doing that. And we talk about women. I mean, there are some women, and this again might be controversial to say, there are some women who are good mothers but terrible wives. There
Yeah.
are some men who are good fathers and terrible husbands. But if we're talking about in terms of intimate relations, men have a right over women and women have a right over men. And I'm not talking about marital rape. I'm not. That's completely haram. I'm not saying that a man has the right to enforce himself on his wife, and that's not what the Prophet ﷺ was speaking about. He's just referring to woman, your husband has a right over you the same way you have a right over him. And I think a lot of women do not realize and they don't really appreciate that. And it's interesting because now you have some American, I've got the lady's name, Michelle Weiner Davis, I think her name is. She spoke about the importance of, like, when she's speaking to married couples, that women have this thing where sometimes they're not necessarily in the mood for sex, but once they start having engaging intimacy, now they're in the mood, and it's called responsive desire. So a woman, whereas men were
Hmm.
generally spontaneous. If we see a woman we're attracted to, we're ready to get off. Whereas a woman, she might not necessarily be interested. And then when you start kissing her and start fondling breasts and start tickling down below, then she's interested. So she was even advising women that just and she used the expression from like just do it. Now again,
Hmm.
those type of conversations in this especially in the climate in the West, it's probably easier for a woman to say than a man because a lot of our sisters unfortunately probably will be triggered by it. But the issue of withholding sex and sexless marriages, or one scholar in Nigeria called it sexual starvation, is actually quite prevalent amongst religious Muslim hijab wearing, niqab wearing, studying in different institutes. Do it. So, but it's just very because men generally we're not going to vocalize those concerns in public naturally because again we don't want. But women and women amongst themselves they wouldn't know if their friend is doing it. If you understand what my point.
Sure.
So it's something that the Prophet ﷺ spoke about it for a reason. The scholars they spoke about it for a reason, and I just think that we shouldn't be um, shy to talk about it. But obviously, speak about it in a way that women understand the importance of men have needs, and they should try. Again, I'm not talking about again because someone will say, "What if she's not feeling what?" It's not talking about that. If she's got a legitimate excuse, it's perfectly fine. She doesn't have to have intercourse with him, as what scholars have said. But it's speaking about where women who weaponize sex, and some women will think, like every time that I mention this, the women will say, "Oh, but what did the man do?" And it's like, no, there's some women who are just vindictive like that. The same way there are some men who are very selfish and vindictive. So we just need to have a really mature and open conversation. And this is really needs to be had amongst adults because you can have this with children or young people or prior to marriage, and everyone will say, no, I would never do that. But the reality is there are a number of, and I do receive a number of messages from men who've been married for like 5 years, 10 years, and they've not been allowed to touch any breasts. That's what they've kind of said. And one guy said, it's difficult because I don't argue. I don't. What did he say? I don't negotiate with terrorists. Like she's
Yeah.
just putting herself ransom. Like it's closed shop. But on the face of it, everything is, and they've got beautiful children and this and the other. So how do you even broach that conversation? Because naturally, men were protective. We don't want to talk about our private lives, with others. So it's like, how do you kind of, and especially if a woman doesn't think she's doing anything that's wrong.
Sure.
Hmm.
So, but
So you talk
if
about
she's a
marital
Muslim,
rape. Marital rape. That's an interesting dichotomy because okay, it makes sense. Like, okay, if she's sick or whatnot, there's like there are clauses. Most dudes aren't gonna be like complete jerks. But if you have people who are weaponizing it, and Sheikh Amr and I, we talk, in your line of work, you tell me about situation you come across where some like women are just going like I like for example, I had a friend I remember like he's a physician. Okay, when he was doing his like residency, his wife was like giving him like blocking him off for like 2-3 months at a time. You know what I mean? And at work, he was like dealing with these nurses who were like freaks. You know, they were inviting him. They were telling him he'd go to work on Monday and be like, yeah, we had an orgy. This is Jackson Park. You know?
By the way, they say a study came out. Nurses are the most promiscuous professions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
they're dangerous.
Horse is a trained nurse.
You're basically a resident, you know, in this hospital, all these freaks, and your wife is like holding out in the bed for 3 months, right? So like now, if he forced himself upon his wife, he's like he's at, you know, you hear Mashaik say this, right? Brothers, when you see a woman like out in the, lower your gaze and just know your wife has that. So you worked a long day and you finna go home and you like you're trying to get some and she closes off, and let's say you forced yourself upon her. Now, because in the way our legal system would define it, that would be like rape, marital rape. But like I'm uncomfortable.
Sharia as well, we don't do that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sheikh Ahmed, but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "La darar wa la dirar," that do not harm or don't return harm. So, if we're not allowed to harm non-combatant, you can't harm your wife. Rape is a form of sexual violence. I know people have issues with the term like marital rape. That how can you rape your wife? But yes, you can rape your wife. And I think we need to be very clear with this. And this is even when Sheikh Ahmed in the beginning was speaking about understanding fiqh and ahkam and rulings. Another thing which is important to understand adab as well, like etiquette. And it's thing that as a man in your right frame, if your wife doesn't want to have sex with you, okay, you need to sort that out. But to force yourself on her, that is something that I don't think, like, you should never do that. So I'm not going to try and, I know there's some people that said, oh, it doesn't, in our legal text, it doesn't mention like consent and things like that. But if you are a self-respecting man, a Muslim, you shouldn't do that. It's a sin as far as I'm concerned from the scholars that I've heard of. And I'm not going to try and like, you know, I just think that we need to kind of be quite clear with that. You need to sort out with your wife. Yeah. But in terms of forcing someone out under no circumstances, should you ever do that?
I'm going to be honest too. I think at a human level too, right? I don't know. I mean, this could just be me, but I don't want to have sex with somebody who doesn't want to have sex with me. Yeah. Like at that moment, right? It's just very weird, right? Like, you know, I don't know. For me, it's just not.
But we're talking about a situation where, like, systemically over time, like they're like talking like 3-4 months.
Yeah, but then I would be thinking about a divorce. I mean, if you try, I have a conversation and be like, hey, either you got to fix it or you know something's not right here because. You know what I mean? Like you have to talk about it, but I mean, I still couldn't fathom the idea of forcing myself onto somebody and saying you're gonna take it. Like it's just, it's like forcing someone to hang out with you. Like if you don't want to be here, don't be here. You know what I mean?
You know, I'm glad you said that. Sorry to butt in, but I'm glad you said that. I mean, I think that plays into because that's your character. Mm-hmm. Like someone can tell you, like you don't need to study fiqh for that. That's your character. Yeah. Like you said, if a woman doesn't want to have sex with you, you're not gonna have sex with her.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, some men, the way they read these historic books of fiqh and things like that, is do I have a like? Even if someone's asking that question, I'm wondering what's your personality like.
Yeah.
How would you want to have sex with a woman who just clearly petrified, clearly doesn't want it, but
true,
you know, it's my right. If anything, jack off, go to the bathroom, and honestly, it's just something that it's for me. I just don't understand it because, and if you think you're going to force yourself on your wife, if you do that, what do you think that's going to happen to the relationship after?
That's my point too. Like in the long run, she's going to be terrified. Long run, it's like, right? It's going to be like, yo, you're going to break down this marriage, right? I mean, because now she looks at someone who violated her.
Yeah.
Not someone
I think what Maheen is saying though is that she's capable of, but she's purposely, like, let's call it weaponizing, right?
Weaponizing,
and he happens to not be able to control himself, and he just jumps on her, and that's considered rape, right? Well, I'm not saying he should do that.
Right,
I'm saying that's something that Allah's. Look,
from a technical point of view, I was trying to get because my understanding was that the nikah is the consent.
Yes, of course it is, but but to move past that, I think that's a common understanding, is that look, we have to understand that Allah tests us in many, many different ways. And some of those tests are by people oppressing us. In this situation, it would be oppressive for a wife to do that to her husband. Uh-huh. But nonetheless, people believe that just because I'm getting married and we did our marriage contract and I did istikhara before I got married, my marriage is going to be perfect. And no, there's going to be tests along the way too. It doesn't mean it's okay what she's doing, but that's something that you have to obviously get some type of counseling. You got to get some professionals involved, and if all else fails and she's going to continue that way, that's where Mort is saying that's grounds for divorce, even for a wife. Like if and this is full Islamic texts are full of this. I'm not saying this to be wishy-washy. one of the conditions for divorce is, for a woman, like asking for a divorce or a khul'a, is if the husband is not having sex with her and she wants to have sex. That's one of the, she can ask for a khul'a, definitely, in that situation, and ask the judge, hey, divorce me of this man because he just doesn't want to have sex with me, right? So it works both ways. So that's obviously the later approach, right?
Sure. Right.
But you have to, if you really love this woman and this is just a phase or whatever, you have to understand, hey man, you're gonna have to be patient here because this is just a part of it, you know?
So I'm thinking like long term too. I'm like, look, you know, we know there is like certain principles in the Sharia, right? For example, the nikah is consent, right? But you don't ever want to come to reduce the marriage to just do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
Right? Marriage is more than that,
Yes,
right?
sir.
Like it's about the longevity of the marriage, right?
Yes, sir.
If you simply reduce it to saying, hey, you know what, you owe me that and I owe you this, right? And you're just keeping it that line. If you don't do that, then if it's purely transactional, it's almost mechanical.
You're already lost. Right?
Yeah, you're lost. I mean, you're not gonna. I mean, the minute someone doesn't do something for you, like it's just okay. Now we got to go our own way, right? It's just that there's really nothing to work on, right? Yeah. And so what I'm saying is, I'm not saying it's not an issue. I'm saying I agree it's an issue that a woman's withholding sex and weaponizing it. I totally agree with it. But I would view this as the same way that, let's say she's on her period. Even no matter how horny you are, you can't have sex with her, right? It's something you can't do, right? Same way, likewise. Hey, if she's not putting out, then she's not putting out. You have to find either therapy or you need to just threaten her with a divorce or go through the divorce, right?
Right.
But you have other avenues to rectify the situation besides jumping on her.